welcome to the channel. This is our next segment of Scientology stories. No matter how you first heard of Scientology, we hope you will learn from these stories and that we can educate you on the language and practices of Scientology along the way. And here's my important note. Whether you're currently in Scientology, an ex-Scientologist, or just curious about learning of the stories of what has gone on in Scientology, the bottom line is Scientology does not want you to hear these stories. So thank you for watching, listening, sharing, and helping us to educate people on the true nature of Scientology. And as always, if you find our content informative, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that bell notification so you are notified when we release new content. With that, I will welcome our guest for today. We will be talking again with Jeff Hawkins for part 2. And welcome, Jeff. Welcome back to the channel.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks for having me again.
My pleasure. I appreciate it. So we will resume where we left off at the end of part 1. You had launched your national campaign on Dianetics, got Dianetics on multiple national bestseller lists. And I thought that we would just take a moment for me to ask you, so at this point, so we're talking 1987, first of all, I was curious how far you'd gotten into Scientology in terms of training, processing, and so forth. And second of all, where your mindset was at by this point, like had any cracks started to form, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I had done the OEC FEBC at on the ship. I think I
Yes.
mentioned that. So that was my training. I was a level 0 auditor at the LA org. When I first got in, I did my first academy level and did some auditing in LA.
Okay. And of course, auditing for anyone listening is the Scientology term for their counseling. They have various different academy levels that train you on how to administer the levels going up the grade chart, the
Yeah,
bridge to
yeah,
total freedom, their levels. Yeah, sorry, go
totally.
ahead.
And by this time, I had reached clear, state of clear,
Okay.
and I was trying to remember exactly where I was. I think I had done maybe a couple of OT levels, maybe 1 and 2 or something like that. And then it was after we got to the base that I did my OT 3 and 4.
Okay.
So which was the farthest that I got in Scientology.
Okay. Which still is these days pretty uncommon for a Sea Org member to reach
Oh,
OT.
totally,
Yeah.
totally.
And that's again where for you and I, like, you know, a general question always comes up, well, how can Scientologists believe in Xenu and this, that, and the other thing? Well, the majority who have not reached the upper levels have never heard of it, truly.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Oh, what's your cup there?
That's my rat tail coffee.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to talk with you afterwards to get that design purchase from you for our merch store.
Exactly.
Oh, you simply can't make up the lies that they spew.
Oh, it's hilarious. It
Yeah.
is just really hilarious.
Yeah. Okay, so you'd reached OT4. So back to my question, had any cracks started to form? Like, where was your head at? You were obviously very dedicated to, I mean, you'd gotten into a position where you're a top marketing executive for Scientology internationally, but you'd
Yeah.
also witnessed abuses and you'd
Well,
seen a lot of things.
yeah. At this point, I hadn't really seen a lot of abuse. I'd
Right.
seen some abuse, the overboarding stuff and all that. But my attitude was always that these people that I'd seen, be rough on staff and all that, like Captain Bill Robertson and so forth, I considered them to be a temporary phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
and my attitude was always they'll go away. They're going to go away, and I'm going to uh, persist. You know,
Yep.
uh, my friend John Sanborn at when I was at pubs, the old timer guy, he used to say, he said, people say that we're dedicated, you know, and he said we're not dedicated. We're just a bunch of stubborn sons of bitches that won't quit.
That's that
And
kind
that
of
was
nails it actually.
yeah, and that was kind of my attitude is like, I'm not going to quit. They're going to quit.
Right.
You know, I'm going to outlast them. You know, and really, my breaking point came years later when I realized that David Miscavige was not going anywhere.
Right. Yeah, which
And
of course we'll get to. I was just curious, kind of
yeah,
filling in those holes,
yeah,
where your mind was at. But okay, so I appreciate that comment in terms of where we were at. So let's pick up where we left off. So your campaign launched. What
yeah,
was
and
the
it's
next major step here in your story?
well, yeah. So the campaign was going great. We were selling tens of thousands of books every week through the retail outlets. Um, and and the impact was being felt in the orgs. And I had Mark Engber. Uh, we were discussing my budget for advertising. I think he was in charge of finance at the time or something.
So a top Scientology management executive for sure.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And he said, "Don't worry about your budget." He said, "That's just a tiny amount compared to the money we're making off that campaign."
Okay.
Because the orgs were booming. The late '80s was the last real boom of Scientology, and the orgs had tons of people coming in, and things were going great. You know,
Yes.
but
And at this point, are you still based in LA, or were you now based in Hemet or Gilman Hot Springs?
well, we weren't at the base yet. We were still in LA,
Okay.
and I had my unit there, which was about 11. I had about 11 staff at the time,
Okay.
and we were running the LRH PR network and having them send out stories about Dianetics. Um, I had a media firm that I was running. Um, so I had 11 staff under me, and then beyond that, we had hundreds of people really working with us on the campaign, public relations people, surveyors, on and on and on. So it was a going concern. Now, one of the things that when I originally studied was doing my research for this campaign, I found an odd fact, which was that everyone who had ever run any sort of Dianetics campaign had been um, axed in some way, sent to the RPF or demoted or kicked out of Scientology, and in one case, shot and killed.
What?
Diane Coletto. Marty
Ah,
tells that story. Marty was there when it happened,
yes.
but
This is the woman that was shot and killed at the PAC base in the late 70s. Is that when
yeah,
that happened? Yeah.
yeah, and she had been running a Dianetics campaign at the time. So I'm
Wow.
kind of like, why would this happen?
Yeah.
And so I was always kind of looking for snipers, if you know what I mean,
Yes.
because I figured,
Literally and figuratively, sounds like.
yes, exactly. And because that was the one thing I could not understand about this campaign is why had it been stopped every time somebody had started to get this thing going?
Hmm.
Why had it been stopped? And pretty soon I found out, um, what was behind it all, at least from the viewpoint of my campaign. Because remember the story about how I locked the missionaires in the closet and so forth?
Yes. Yes.
Well, I'm in the middle of the campaign, and two missionaries arrived. Um,
And again, for context, missionaries in Scientology They send in Sea Org members, give them basically complete authority over the unit that they're going into to take over and fix some horrible situation, some alleged horrible situation. But go ahead.
Yeah, but the horrible situation is we were selling tens of thousands of books and the
Right.
orgs were booming. That
Yes.
was like the horrible situation. So a mission arrived, and it was Ronnie Miscavige
David
and
Miscavige's brother.
yeah, and Bill Dendu.
Okay.
And so they set up in a room opposite of my office there in the complex. And I got called into their office that they had set up. And um, they started just accusing me of all kinds of crimes, that I was ripping off money from the church, that I was having an affair with my media director, which was complete false.
Yep.
On and on and on. And I was like, where is this coming from? We had just had the biggest week of sales that we had ever had. We were selling more books than had ever been sold in the history of Scientology.
Mm-hmm.
And we were booming the orgs. And I'm like, what?
Right.
You know?
So even in accordance with Scientology's own internal directives, you shouldn't have been a target. You should have been protected.
Yeah, no, they shouldn't have looked at me sideways, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So I was trying to figure out what was going on. And it took me a while to figure that out, a couple of years really. But they had been briefed and fired by David Miscavige.
Yep. I'm not surprised.
Exactly. And I found out over time that David Miscavige hates anyone that is more competent or smarter than he is.
Yes. Yes, I absolutely agree. That's his trademark, as well as presuming what is going on with his target of disfavor as a result of that. That's why when you mentioned they were accusing you of these very specific things, in my experiences, that was always David Miscavige's trademark.
Yeah, exactly. He had briefed them and that I was a complete criminal, and had fired them in to fix the campaign. And they wanted to reorganize marketing and establish the Planetary Dissemination Organization, the big marketing organization. And so the way that they were going to do that was to set up this overall umbrella marketing organization and dismantle my unit, take all of my people and put them into each division of this umbrella organization.
Okay.
So in essence, I would have no more unit, and I was just going to be a division head in this big umbrella unit.
I see. And who was going to head up? Who was going to be your senior of this unit? Like, who was going to be the CEO equivalent?
Was Ronnie.
Okay.
He was going to be marketing executive international with this unit directly under him.
I see.
And which eventually happened. We moved to the base. He became marketing exec int, and Bill Dendu became the CO PDO, the CO Planetary Disem Org. But so I was, put in lower conditions, and had my unit
persona non grata, essentially.
Yeah, persona non grata. I had my unit disbanded, and boy, that was such a shock to me.
Yeah,
because we were doing something that had never been done for Scientology before.
Right.
I had been commended by Hubbard
at this time.
Yeah.
So this was before Hubbard passed away.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's not forget to talk about that. I would love to hear your perspective on that whole series of events in Scientology.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just completely confused and bewildered by this whole thing. And the stats, the book sales stats started to slip pretty much right away. I mean, we had such a head of steam going that it was kind of hard to kill.
Yeah.
And the book sales stayed fairly high, for another year or so.
Okay.
But they had peaked out and they were starting to go down. Um, which of course that got me in even more trouble. Oh, you have a failed campaign. This is a failed campaign. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So
And
I'm
of course,
I'm
nobody would ever acknowledge that what took the steam out or the wind out of the sails was what Miscavige had initiated.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And shortly after that, by about 1991, the Scientology international stats started to crash.
Okay.
And if you if anybody could ever escape the ant base with copies of the stat graphs, you would see that all of the stats were going up, 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 and then in mid 1991 they started going down, 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 down. And when I left the base in 2004, they were still going down.
Yes.
Had never recovered from that point.
Yes.
Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, and so that was David Miscavige's reorganization of the Dianetics campaign, which resulted in no Dianetics campaign.
Right.
Yeah, and and this is kind of his operating basis. If you look at all of his major initiatives, like Golden Age of Tech,
Yes.
uh, completely decimated training in Scientology.
Yes.
That's never
And for
recovered.
anyone listening, Golden Age of Tech is a complete revamp that Miscavige did of all training courses in Scientology that was launched in 1996 and which promptly caused all statistics to crash internationally. Do you remember that, Jeff?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
God forbid that anyone actually say that out loud, though.
I know, I know. And then he reorganized management, and management disappeared.
Right.
There's no management. So
Yes.
this is his pattern, which is highly destructive. And it's always amazing to me that Scientologists haven't spotted this,
Yeah. Well, I think it's fair to say that a large majority have and they've exited at this point.
which is true. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is absolutely true.
Yeah.
Um, because everything he touches just goes completely to shit.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And at the Ent base, I was always trying to figure out, why are things so bad at the Ent base? Who's the SP? Well,
Right. The
he's
suppressive
sitting
person.
he's sitting right at the top, you know,
Right.
and everything he touches, boom, is
Yeah.
destroyed.
Yeah. Which, by the way, just comment. Did you know that periodically he would have files reviewed to find out who had ever said he was a suppressive person, and then promptly got rid of those people?
And get rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Anyway, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So at what point in this story should we discuss your perspective on when Hubbard died?
Well, it was right around that time.
Okay.
Um, and I just thought that whole event was bizarre.
And you're talking about the LA Palladium, the event that
Yeah,
was held at the Palladium.
yeah,
Did
yeah.
you attend that event?
Oh, yeah, I was there. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, what was that like?
It
Like,
was,
did you know before, like going into that event that Hubbard had passed away?
no, no,
Wow. Okay.
it was just laid on us cold. And, and then Miscavige came up and he's, boom, here I am. And he's the master of ceremonies,
Mm-hmm.
which was a deliberate positioning on his part,
Right.
because a lot of people thought that Broker would take over, Pat
Pat
Broker.
Broker.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it was Miscavige who took the stage and then introduced him and brought him on stage. So he's positioning himself as the kingmaker.
Yeah.
You know,
The controller.
he's controlling everything.
Yeah.
And that's why he MCs events, by the
Right.
way.
Yeah, no, I was good. That thought came to mind when you mentioned he was master of ceremonies. He's been that ever since.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because he wants to be seen as the guy who says who comes on and who goes off, you know,
Yes. The puppet
and
master.
yeah, and controls everything, you
Yeah.
know. So, yeah, it was a bizarre event. And then the scavenge was going on about nobody should feel any grief, you know, because that's a lower emotion and we don't want any emotion.
Right.
Uh, well, I felt a little bit of grief
Yeah.
because
I mean, you'd met him personally.
I had met him personally and he had backed me up with this campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, that thing I mentioned before, you have a winning horse that's not being fed enough oats.
Right.
So he was backing my effort and he was commending me for my effort.
Mm-hmm.
So, I didn't feel he was at all against me, you know.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm in a position where I'm having to defend myself against attacks and I'm trying to defend my unit against being dismantled,
Right.
um, with no success, you know. And and I couldn't lock Bill and Ronnie in a closet. That wasn't
That wasn't a possible
that
solution in
wasn't an
this case.
option. Yeah. So yeah, so the unit got dismantled, absorbed into this larger marketing organization, and that larger marketing organization then took over the marketing of everything in Scientology.
Okay.
So we had no time to spend on the Dianetics campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we were all moved to the base.
Okay. And what year was this now?
Now, I think it was early 1989 we were moved to the base.
Okay. And you were still married to Nancy at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you both moved.
Yeah.
Okay.
The whole unit moved, but everybody had to be cleared for the base. And there were about 50 staff in the PDO organization in LA.
Yeah.
And only 17 were cleared for the base.
Okay. And of course, for our listeners, by cleared, you mean the security clearance, which means you have to be interrogated on all aspects of your life, checked for any connections to government, media, blah, blah, blah. And you
Drug
have to
history.
be approved.
Yeah, drug history, sexual
Right.
history, and all.
Yes.
I don't know how I was ever approved, believe me, because I had taken LSD
Right.
like
Which,
a half a
yeah.
dozen times,
Okay.
So
But you
I
joined the
was
C organization before that became a
before that was
disqualification, because in later years, if you'd taken LSD, you're no longer allowed to join the C organization.
no.
Yeah.
But
okay,
I was.
Sorry, go ahead.
But the fact was, I was already INT cleared because I'd been going up for the weekly meetings.
Okay.
So I was already INT cleared, so I didn't even have to be re-cleared. I was just good to go.
You were grandfathered in?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so of your 50 staff, only 17 make it up to the Gilman Hot Springs headquarters.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we are decimated.
Yes.
At the same time, every bit of marketing for Scientology was being dumped onto us.
Yep.
And what I kept hearing about the campaign from Miscavige was it's a waste of money because these people aren't getting into our churches, which was a lie because they were booming the churches.
Yes.
But it was always, well, they're not getting into the churches. What, it's a waste of money. It was always waste of money, waste of money, waste of money. And so I thought, okay, well, I took that on as a marketing problem. And I started surveying the people that had bought books and trying to find out what problems were they running into. And they were saying that they didn't know how to audit Dianetics after reading the book. They'd read the book, but they still didn't know how to audit.
Yes.
And so I thought, okay. So I sat down and wrote a script, a video script called How to Use Dianetics.
Yes.
And you can still buy that video in any org. You know, they're still, I wrote the script, but they're still selling it, you know. But
Maybe they'll stop after we air this video. We'll see.
yeah, and I wrote that. I'm an
There you go.
SP.
How do you rectify that with your
Yeah,
in
yeah,
your mind logically? But yes, go
yeah.
ahead.
It's crazy. So I wrote this thing, got the script approved, and then it was shot by Cine, the
The
cinema
production
division.
division of Golden Era that shoots all the videos and films, and yes, which Mark later worked in for many years.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So so I made that had that video made, which sort of demonstrated step by step how you audited Book One Dianetics. And then, and I actually took that out to a company in Hollywood and had it tested on a focus group. And I think I'm the only person in Scientology to ever test anything out on a focus group
That wouldn't surprise me.
because that would be unheard of. Like, what do a bunch of wogs know? You know, we know
Right.
better.
And plus Hubbard never said anything about focus groups,
He
right?
never said anything about focus
Right.
groups. You know.
So how dare you think outside of the Hubbard box?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And so, and that was very interesting because, you know, they sit there with a dial, a little dial in their hands. And if they're really interested in what's going on, they go to the right. And if they're bored, they go to the left and
Huh.
so forth. Or if they dislike something. And we found out a couple of key things. And I went in uh, and rescripted those parts and then got that approved and took that to Cine. And oh, they were so pissed off that they had to reshoot this because I fucked up. You know, I mean, you can imagine the Cine guys.
Oh yes.
Yeah, yeah, they were a vicious lot. You know,
Yes.
so I'm just a you know
And of course, again, just a comment to contribute to what you're saying there. In Scientology, there's a big thing about do it right the first time. You
oh
have to
yeah,
do it right the first time.
yeah,
So
because
this would have been considered a violation of that.
yeah, exactly, because Hubbard always did everything perfect the first time.
Right.
So why can't you? You know.
Right.
And I'm saying, you know, well, I had a focus group watch it, and this is what they were saying. So we got to fix it, you know?
Yes.
So, and then it came up to how do we sell this thing? And we did send some mailings out to the book buyer list, and we're able to sell some that way. But then I decided to do an infomercial to sell it. And I packaged up a hardback copy of the book, the video on how to use the book, and a couple of lectures by Hubbard, packaged those into what we were calling the Dianetics kit.
Yes.
And I figured out we could sell it for 1995, which is like the infomercial ideal price to sell something in an infomercial.
Okay.
And I studied infomercial marketing pretty extensively. I was reading books by all the best infomercial people, and the gal that was doing my media buying had worked for years for Ron Popeil of Ronco fame,
Okay.
and he was like the king of direct marketing. So she could handle all the media buying very professionally for this. And so I scripted out the infomercial. We shot it with Michael Fairman as the spokesman. And we started running this thing. This is now early 1990s.
Okay.
We started running this this infomercial. And I hired a firm out of Omaha, Nebraska to take the calls, because if you've done the infomercial right and then you show the 1-800, just call now and you'll get all of these things for just 19.95, blah, blah, blah. And then you give the phone number. Well, the phone number went to a telemarketing company in Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay.
And I had flown out and seen their operation. Um, and the great thing about that is that if a person calls that number, they're already ready to buy.
Yes.
So all that the operators have to do basically is take the order.
Yes.
So we gave them a script that they could use, and we started to roll with this thing. And all they had to do was pick up the phone and say Dianetics or whatever, and then a script would automatically come up on their screen
Huh.
of what they were to say.
Yep.
And they were to just take the order, and boom, that was it. You know?
Yes.
And of course, I got hassled over that too. Like, why do we have to hire this firm? We can have our own people answer the phones,
Yeah.
Typical uneducated response. And I said, okay, so you want to put 50 people onto phones to answer these calls, right?
Right.
Well, the infomercial only airs, say, a few times a day. What do they do the rest of the time?
Right.
Are they just sitting around, And
Yeah.
then within like a few minutes, within 10 minutes, you're going to have 50 calls
Right.
or 100 calls.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Anyway, I finally got okay to hire this Omaha firm that could just handle it all,
Right. That's what they did.
That's what they did. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So we started running the infomercial, and Bill Dendu was my senior as the COPDO.
Meaning
And
the head of the marketing organization.
head of the marketing organization, and he liked to micromanage the infomercial buys. So every week we would analyze the returns, because we got all the returns and the times they called and everything. So we knew which airings had worked and which airings hadn't worked.
Okay.
And then we'd say, okay, cancel this and put more in this and blah, 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 blah. We were micromanaging everything. And Bill loved that. He loved to micromanage the media buys. That was like a big deal.
Understood.
And about this time, Bill has always been a sports fan.
Yes.
He's a big sports guy. And he gets this idea of having Dianetics sponsor a race car in the Indy 500.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I don't think so, because I was looking at the demographics of people that were into racing, and they did not match the book buying demographics at all.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't think so. And Bill was like, no, you're just being elitist. These racing fans, they buy as many books as anybody else. You're just being classist and elitist,
Okay.
And I'm like, well, no, this is called market research,
Right.
But no, he was just really jazzed about this. And we ended up talking to Roger Penske, who was a big racing sponsor, and he was entering 3 cars in the race that year. And so we worked a deal with him that one of the cars would be a Dianetics car.
Yes.
Hurrah, hurrah. And then he backed out of the deal when we were really close to race time.
Okay.
And so Bill went out to, I think it was Phoenix, and met with Andy Granatelli, who is like Mr. Indy 500.
Okay.
And he was sponsoring a couple of cars in the Indy 500. And so we arranged the sponsorship with him.
Okay.
So I had to change out all of the promotion so that it was Andy Granatelli's car and the new driver were the featured things in the promotion, And the big advantage of that was that the flag regs were always interested in regging money for big marketing campaigns
Okay.
because it was easier to get donations for marketing campaigns than it was to get donations for legal actions or anything else.
Right.
If you say we need money for this court case, that was a harder sell than we need money to expand Scientology with this big campaign we're doing.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah, so that was always, a big part of any campaign I did was preparing materials for the flag regs, you
Okay.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and they were able to reg a lot of money for the campaigns. But guess how much of that money ever went to campaigns?
Probably zero.
Nothing.
Yeah, that was my guess.
It never went to the campaigns. It went
Hmm.
right to reserves. Of
Right.
course. Of course it did.
Reserves meaning the int management coffers, essentially, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because the statistic of every international executive is Sea Org reserves.
Yes.
So, and that explains a lot of the craziness that you see in Scientology and
Yes.
all the money, money
Yep.
emphasis.
Yep. And it's always got to keep going up no matter what.
Yeah. So I was always being pressured to produce these presentations that the Regis could use to get donations for
Yeah.
the big
And of course,
campaigns.
sorry, I should have mentioned this, but Reg is registrar, the staff who are solely responsible for obtaining money and donations from their members.
Yeah, the salesman.
Yes, there
You
you
know,
go.
they're the king in Scientology is the Regis, the salesman.
Yes.
But we never saw a penny of that money. You know,
Yes.
so craziness.
Yeah.
So and then this gets into uh, when so David Miscavige. Am I frozen? Oh no, there I am.
You're good.
Um, David Miscavige, as I mentioned, absolutely hated me. I don't know if you remember that time where he had the entire base crew do IQ tests.
I do. That was in the early 2000s by my recollection.
I think so. I
Yes.
think so. So everyone on the base did an IQ test, and this wasn't the Scientology IQ
Right, which and so
test.
let's talk about this for a minute because I think it's helpful. It will give more context if we explain this for anyone listening. So in Scientology, everything is based on a battery of tests. You do a battery of tests before an action in Scientology and after. Any position that you're assigned to is based on review of this battery of tests. And it was intelligence, the IQ test, an aptitude test, a leadership test, and the OCA, the personality test, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so at some point, Miscavige, probably with some validity, pointed out that, well, yeah, of course, when you do the same set of tests, hundreds, probably thousands of times, you're not necessarily getting a clean picture of improvement or lack thereof. Is that fair to say from what you recall?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So he decided to bring in a professional IQ test, not this ridiculous
yeah. Which is ironic that he didn't trust the Scientology IQ test to
right.
be accurate.
Exactly.
So, so everybody on the base does an IQ test, and I think he wanted to know who was smarter than he was.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah, because he wanted to know who he had to look out for.
Right.
So anyway, I came in second highest person on the base.
Yes.
I was number two. Number one was that British guy in his office. I forget his name.
In David Miscavige's office?
Yeah, COB's office. British guy.
Francois Lalouette?
I think that was his name.
Okay.
Write that down. Yeah, because I can remember his name. He was number one.
Okay. I didn't remember that. I remembered that you scored really, really high.
I was second. I was number two.
Yeah.
Highest IQ on the
Yeah.
base. Oh, and then he used to really just rub my face in that,
Yes.
and that really made him hate me.
Yeah. And I will say, so as I recall anyway, when our paths first crossed, I came to that base in August 1991, and I was working in the staff training area. So I was I don't remember specifically, but I probably was your supervisor, like, the person that would oversee your training in Scientology.
Mhm.
And it's just ironic to me that Miscavige treated you so poorly, and yet you had this incredible history of being a top marketing executive in Scientology for many, many years.
Yeah, yeah, I know, and I didn't understand it for years. And and then he started getting physical with me in meetings.
Okay, and
You
when
know,
did that start?
it was around that time, around uh, late '90s, early 2000s, and there was one particular time that I write about in my book in detail. Um, we had been running an infomercial for a while, and I decided let's do a new infomercial.
Hmm.
So I contacted the people that I knew that were the top um, people in the infomercial industry. There was a guy named Tim Hawthorne who had written uh, a book called Guide to Infomercial Marketing,
Okay.
and he was considered like the number one guy for infomercials. So I contacted Tim and I said, "Who's the best infomercial writer that's exists?" And he referred me to this woman who had written many successful infomercials. And I asked her if she would help me write an infomercial, and she said sure. And so I wrote a script and sent it off to her, and she critiqued it,
Hmm.
and she told me all of the things that work. Like there have to be there's a thing in an infomercial called a call to action, which means that's where you hard sell them. Say,
Yes.
buy now, you got to buy now, call this number now, and so forth. And she said, there have to be three of those in a half hour, I think it was. So, and they're like, one is 8 minutes in, and the next one's 16 minutes in, and then the final one just before you end.
Yeah.
She had it all exactly worked out. So we went back and forth with this infomercial, with me writing it and her critiquing it. And finally, she said, "This is good. This will sell." She gave it her stamp of approval.
Hmm.
So I submitted it to Miscavige, right?
Yep. Because he had to approve it, because he has to approve everything.
Because he has to approve everything,
Right.
um, which again is a power move.
Yes, absolutely. He
If
runs
you have to
anything and
approve
everything in
everything,
Scientology by evidence of he approves everything.
he approves everything,
Yeah.
and then when it fails, it's the person who did its fault.
Of course.
But so I sent it up to him. The next day, I get called up to a meeting in Del Sol, in what later became the Hole, the double wide trailers where CMO Int and Exec Strata had their offices.
Yes.
And I get called up to the conference room, and there's this huge table with all of Exec Strata and CMO Int along one side of it.
Yes.
And I'm sort of put in the middle there. And Miscavige comes in and he slams my script down on the table, as he loved to do. And he said, "Have you guys seen what this guy is writing? Here." And he flips it open and just starts reading at random, and he goes, "Oh, it's just shit. That's terrible." And I'm thinking, well, he doesn't know all the research that's gone into this, and he doesn't know that it has been given the Good Housekeeping seal of approval by the top infomercial writer in the United States. So,
Yes.
so I'm say, so I stand up and I say, "Sir, if I could just," and that's as far as I got. And he's like, you see how he looks at me. You see see how he talks to me. This is what I'm getting from Gold all the time, and you guys don't do anything about it. See how he looks at me. See how he looks at me. And I'm like, what? I don't know how I'm looking at you.
Right. I'm pretty certain I was at this meeting, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I was in RTC at this time, Religious
Mm.
Technology Center, and I was one of the people that would have to attend all of the meetings that Miscavige had with management.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel sorry for you there.
Well, we were both there, right?
And,
Likewise.
yeah. Anyway, so he gets up on the table and he comes running across straight at me, and I'm standing, and he just jumps at me and starts hitting my face and pins me back against the pony walls that were there in the WDC space. Hitting me, knocks me to the ground, you know, and my legs ended up tangled in his when
Mm.
I fell. And he's like, "Let go of my legs." I'm like, what? I'm not doing anything.
Right.
I just fell here. Yeah. And he stomps out of the room. And uh, all of the execs around me were going, get up, don't make him wrong for
Right.
hitting you. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
and
what?
unfortunately, it's never like, "Oh my goodness, are you okay?"
No, of course
Right.
not. Yeah, it wasn't like, oh, get up, are you okay? Should we get the medical person in here?
Right.
I had cuts on my face where he'd been hitting me. And and I was just like, what just happened?
Right.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah,
because
because for again, side comment, translate that situation into the real world. At least 20 people would call 911.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, the police would be called, and
Right.
he would be hauled away for assault.
Right.
You know, but no,
Yeah.
it was all get up, don't make him wrong for hitting you.
Right.
Don't make him what? I could not understand this at all. So of course, I got hauled off to ethics
Right.
because what had I done that had angered him so
Right.
much?
Because of course, in from a Scientology perspective, you did something that made this happen to you. What is
Yes,
it that you did?
yes. What am I hiding? What
Right.
did I do
Yeah.
that caused him to lose his temper? You know,
Yes.
uh, but no.
And again, what year was this now?
This was now, I think, 2002.
Okay. And by this point, you were no longer married to Nancy by this point?
She had blown.
Okay.
Yeah,
When did that happen?
I am trying to remember. It was, I think, very early 2000s, maybe, or late 1999.
Okay.
Yeah, because she had been in market research, and then she got in trouble because the birthing buildings were being built.
Yeah. And this was
And
where the staff were going to be moved. So anyone that worked at the headquarters was going to live on that property
was
in
going to
these.
live on the property.
Yes.
And I always said to myself when those buildings were being built, I said, I am never going to live in those buildings. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I never did live in those buildings.
Right. I remember having the exact same thought. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, like, no, not going to go there.
Yeah.
Well, we had a tour of the spaces, and it was like, you can't have any personal items on display in your room.
Yes.
I was like, what? No, family pictures? No, absolutely nothing. And then, well, can we have a mini fridge or a coffee maker? No, forbidden. You can't have any food in the room. You can't make coffee in the room. Well, how
And
do we?
wasn't there also a limitation even as to how much personal belongings you could have?
something like that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, it was
like it was like
awful,
one
whatever it was.
one trunk or one, cabinet that was for, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and you couldn't personalize your space at all.
Yes.
You couldn't have pictures of your parents there, nope, nothing, you
Yep.
know? So I was like, "No way
I've
am I
always
gonna."
likened it to, from my perspective anyway, again, side comment, but it's occurred to me in retrospect, the ideal Sea Org member is an android.
Yeah, yeah, and there were plenty of those,
Yeah, there sure were.
'cause the only way to survive on the base was to be invisible,
Yes.
and so there were a lot of staff who were doing their best to be invisible, to do nothing, to produce nothing that could cause a controversy, which anything you produce could cause a controversy, you know?
Yes.
So I always call those people NPCs.
NPC?
You know what an NPC is?
No.
In a video game, they're called non-player characters.
Oh,
And they're
okay.
all the
Yes.
people that are walking on the street when you're in the game.
Yes.
Those are NPCs.
Okay.
They're just computer artifacts, basically,
Yep.
and they have nothing to do with the story or anything. They're just background chatter. Yeah. So
Oh my gosh, a day at the base would make a freaking crazy computer game.
yeah. So the people who survived were the NPCs. You
Yeah,
know, and because they never did anything and they never got in any trouble.
right.
Anybody who produced anything at the base was considered a troublemaker.
Yes.
Um, because they were the guys that were always getting in trouble with COB.
Right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So,
And
and
so just finish telling me what happened with Nancy.
so there was a survey just before, um, well, long before the birthing buildings were built. um, and the survey was, would you rather live in town or on the base?
Yes. Wasn't this 1995, by the way? Or early 1996? I remember
Could
the
have been.
day that survey was taken.
Oh, boy. Well, I answered it correctly because I knew exactly what was going on.
Yeah, you could smell a rat from a mile away.
I knew that it was a trap,
It
you
was a
know?
quote unquote survey.
Yeah, it was a survey. Would you rather be, uh, you know, with this whole program or against it, you know?
Okay. Yep.
But I was not able to talk with Nancy about that because it was just sprung on us. So she wrote in her survey that she would rather live in town, and she said that
Which of course is where we lived at the time.
which is where we lived at the
Right.
time, and she said that she hated the enforced Scottish motif,
Mm. Okay.
which was, of course, LRH's fancy.
Yes.
You
He had
know,
written that was to be the motif of
that was the
those.
motif of the base.
Yes.
So guess whose survey got read out at the muster?
Nancy's.
It was Nancy's, you know.
Yeah.
And so shortly after that, she blew. She had been demoted from being a copywriter and on, and she was just getting hassled. And
Did she tell you that she was going to blow?
no,
Yeah.
no, she had to go to LA for an event
Okay.
because certain staff always went down to do surveys or set things up or do something. She was part of that crew,
Okay.
and so she took our car and drove it to the Ontario airport and hopped on a plane.
Oh wow.
It didn't say anything to me at all.
Yeah. Which is not surprising. That happened commonly. I was just curious. And what was your reaction to that?
I mean, I was pretty devastated because at that point we'd been married, I think, 15 years.
Wow.
So, and which is the longest I've ever been married to anyone, you
Yeah.
know. And so I was pretty devastated. I had to go home every night and pack her stuff to send off to her.
Wow.
And So everything went into boxes, including a lot of my tears,
Oh, yeah.
went
I'm
into the
sorry.
boxes.
And did you have a chance to talk to her at all? I know that's to you and I, that's a silly question, but to everybody else, I'm sure they're wondering.
No, I was not able to talk to her at all.
Not
You know,
able to or not allowed?
not allowed to.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
I knew that I wasn't going to be allowed to.
Right.
Um, but fortunately, we got back in touch after I left
Awesome.
the Sea Org, and I'm still in touch with her.
Yeah.
So
So I'm presuming that you were forced to divorce her then?
yes, yes, definitely so. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, whether for context, I suppose, in a normal marriage, okay, maybe there's differences that might come up, but you talk about that. And even to play devil's advocate in Scientology, they always say, oh, well, communication is the universal solvent.
Yeah. There's so much hypocrisy in
Of
Scientology
course. Of
once you
course.
look for it.
Of course.
Uh,
Yeah.
the
Once you start looking, you can't stop finding it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, the one that always gets me is think for yourself,
Right.
but you can never disagree with Hubbard.
Right.
But think for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one that always gets me is the Hubbard quote unquote viewpoint system, where he says, he listen to all people's viewpoints.
Yeah, the multiple
The
viewpoint
multiple
system.
viewpoint system. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah,
But
no.
yet only accept his viewpoint. That's
Yeah,
the only
yeah.
one that's right, or Miscavige in this case.
Yeah. And the other one, of course, is if anything bad happens to you, you pulled it in.
Yes.
Except that doesn't apply to Miscavige or Hubbard.
Right.
If something
Yes.
bad happens to them, it's not their fault. It's
Yes.
you. Okay. So yeah, so Nancy Blue. Um and at this point, every time I saw COB, he would use me as a punching bag, which was just awful. Um he was taking us on a tour of Building 50 one time,
Mm-hmm.
and
And Building 50 was the
the
$40
RTC building.
million religious technology center building that he'd had built
Yeah, and
on the property.
on the property, yeah. And so we're touring around, and we all go into one room, and then we're all going out of that room, and I'm standing holding the door open, and as he passes me, he punches me in the gut, right below my rib cage, and I cannot breathe. And he says, uh, said something about, well, I can smell CI, you know,
By which he meant
any
counterintention,
counterintention
meaning
anytime.
that you were bent on not getting anything of his orders done.
Yeah. That I was this horrible person, and that's why he punched me, you know.
Yeah.
And another time we were down in the lower lodges conference room, and we all went outside into that little square that's between the lodges and the tunnel. We're all out in that little square, and he comes up to me and he hit me on my ears like about 10 times, just bam, 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 bam. Then he went over and knocked Markieta to the ground.
Another top Scientology
Another
executive.
top executive. And, this just became the usual thing. I was going to get beat up by him no
Yeah.
matter what I did.
And I think it's fair to say, just to help people understand, I've seen the question asked many times, why did no one ever fight back? What would be your answer to that?
Well, I usually tell people this story. I described my experience one time to a guy who was a Navy SEAL,
Mm-hmm.
Tough guy, and he was like, why didn't you hit him back? I would have flattened that guy,
Right.
Yeah. And I just said to him, what if he was an admiral? And he was quiet for a minute, and then he said, oh, I see. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
He
An
wasn't just
admiral with a ton of security guards, for all intents and purposes, surrounding him.
yeah,
A protection layer.
an admiral with a big entourage.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. No, you don't. But I also tell people that years later, in 2010, I went on Anderson Cooper 360
Yes.
and I told that story to a national audience of millions.
Yes, which is an amazing show.
Yeah,
I will include the link to that in this description because that was a historical
yeah.
expose on
It was called
Scientology.
History of Violence, and it was about violence in Scientology.
Yes.
And I told my story about being physically assaulted by Miscavige to a national audience. And I always say, that's me hitting back.
Yes, right?
Yeah,
far more
exactly.
effective, and far more classy too. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that was the beginning of the end for me.
Yeah.
Because after that, I was doing a doubt formula
Yeah,
one
which,
time.
and again, in Scientology, anytime you have a question like, do I want to be here? Do I not want to be here? There's 8 steps of this formula that you follow from L. Ron Hubbard called the doubt formula,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
supposed to result in you deciding to eternally stay in Scientology. Wouldn't you agree?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's supposed to make you stay, you know.
Yes.
So, and then the first thing was decide who are your friends.
Yes.
And you're supposed to go, my friends are LRH, COB, da da da. That had to be the first line.
Right.
And I was starting to write that out, and I stopped and I said, wait a second, he's not my friend.
Right. Spot on observation from your
Yeah,
experiences. Yep.
yeah, absolutely. I said, no, he is not my friend. And that was kind of the beginning of the end. You
Yeah. And
know,
what year was this?
this would have been 2003, maybe.
Okay. And sorry, I don't think so. So you explained that Nancy Blue, aka escaped, and that you then, as a result of that, were required to divorce her. And so, what was the situation now in terms of relationship?
Well, it was in the early 2000s that I met wife number 3, Kathy.
Okay, and here I'll add a picture. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, here we
yeah.
go.
No, it's
That's
a
the
beautiful
picture I have.
picture of her.
Yep.
Yeah,
And this
and
is Catherine Fraser.
Catherine Fraser,
Yep.
she is currently the port captain at the Int base. So she has to go out and handle any reporters or media that come to the Int base.
Yes.
And we actually ended up in the same movie.
Right. The same show.
Yeah, Louis Theroux's movie called My Scientology Movie.
Oh, I didn't realize that you were both in that, but you were also both in Anderson Cooper's
Anderson
show.
Cooper's show. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What was that like?
Uh, I mean, I got a call from Anderson Cooper, and he said, this was after we had filmed our show, and he said, Scientology is sending all of your wives out to be interviewed,
Yeah.
and he said, do you have anything you want to tell me about Catherine? And I said I would never say anything bad about Catherine. I said she's a wonderful woman, and she has a heart of gold, which she does.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole reason she wanted that port captain post was she knew how badly staff were treating each other at the Int base, and she wanted to do something about it. And as port captain, she would be holding chaplain from above.
Right. Which is the position in Scientology that deals with any
Yeah, any problems.
malcontent.
Yeah.
Yes.
And she thought that she could improve the tone of the base from that post. And that's why she took it.
Makes
And
sense.
which just shows you that at heart, she is a compassionate woman and she does have a heart of gold.
Right.
And so, no, I would never say anything uh, about Catherine. So
Yeah.
she goes on the show, and she's all, oh, he's a liar, he's a liar, he's a liar. They'd been drilled into that. And I got a call later from the producer of the show, And he said, I just want to tell you something. He said, he- like she's going, oh, he's a liar, he's a liar, he's a liar. And then Anderson Cooper says, do you want to know what your ex-husband said about you? And she's like, and he said, you're a wonderful woman with a heart of gold. And she's all, uh, the producer told me that a few minutes after that, she had to excuse herself and go into the bathroom. And he said she was in there throwing up.
Wow.
And my heart just went out to her when I heard that, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I know. It's a really sad state of affairs that good people have been roped into this evil organization, and unfortunately you and I both know just only too well that they are following orders to do these horrible things because their survival frankly depends on it
Yeah, yeah, totally.
in that world.
Yeah.
Of course, they can wake up and get out, and the Aftermath Foundation will gladly help them do so. But until they do, it's a really, really bad state of affairs.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's horribly rough on people, you know.
Yeah.
So, and I never told her about any of these beatings.
Right.
Yeah,
Because nobody was ever allowed to
you're not allowed to
speak
talk about that.
say anything bad about David Miscavige.
Yeah, and she
Right.
would ask me why I had scratches on my face. I would say, "Oh, I fell down into a bush or something," you know.
Wow.
That you just had to invent something.
Yeah.
So she knew nothing about what I had been through and how many times I had been physically attacked by Miscavige,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
other people.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
it really did become an environment of
yeah,
abuse, an
yeah.
abusive environment where people just willy-nilly would attack other staff. All right, so
Oh,
back to where we were. So you're doing this doubt formula.
yeah, yeah. Well, I was constantly in lower conditions, as most of the base was at
Right.
that point. Following the 2000 event, which was a huge flap, if you
Yes.
remember.
Yes, the you're talking about the Y2K New Year's event.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
which was an utter and complete flap.
Yes.
And after that, liberties were canceled, days off were canceled,
Not that we had them
vacations.
still before that, but they
But
they were
yeah,
altogether
but
struck
now
from
it
the
was
list.
totally shut off,
Right.
and it stayed that way until I left, and probably still is that way. You know.
Yeah. And so tell me what happened. Like how did you end up getting out of there?
Well, I was offloaded from the base 3 or 4 times.
Right. And offload is the term that they use when you're essentially kicked out of the Sea organization.
Not the Sea Org. I
Okay.
was still in the Sea Org.
Okay, so you were just offloaded from the base to a lower organization. Sometimes, like there was staff that were offloaded in New York that were
Hmm.
just kicked out on the street and
Yeah,
given $20 and then brought back a few hours later. Did you ever
yeah.
hear about that?
But it doesn't surprise me because that
Yeah.
that happened to me in L.A.
Oh,
too.
okay. Well, go ahead. Back to your story. So you were offloaded from the property to
And
Los Angeles.
well, first I was offloaded to the Int Ranch,
Okay. The Happy Valley
Happy Valley
property.
Ranch, which is about 8 miles from the Int base
Right.
on the Saboba Indian Reservation,
Yes.
and that was where the incorrigible bad people were being sent at the
Yes.
time,
And
and
were you put on the rehabilitation project force there, or were you just doing like heavy manual
just
labor?
doing hard labor,
Okay.
you know and we were all shown our SP declares,
Okay. Meaning
and we were
you're a
told,
piece of paper that says you're now a suppressive person bent on destroying all of mankind,
yeah,
quote
yeah,
unquote, allegedly.
yeah, yeah, and they said, this is your suppressive person declare, but we are holding on to it, um, pending your good behavior, If you don't
Yes.
behave, we're going to issue this, so everybody was, that's how they were controlling us out there. And of course, we were cleaning out the property and doing this and that.
This must have been when they were getting ready to sell that property then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And they needed to get it cleaned up. Um, then from there, we were all taken in buses with all of our possessions out to the pack ranch
Okay.
in uh, out near Santa Clarita,
Yes.
which is a couple hours north of the base. Well, north of LA, actually.
Okay.
And we were cleaning that property up because that was going to become a Narconon facility.
Hmm.
Never was, because the local people in that local community wouldn't have it. They didn't want a drug rehab center in the middle of their, and particularly a Scientology one
Right.
in the middle of their place. But we were fixing up the property and fixing up all the buildings and de-weeding the place completely. There was a lot of work to be done. And then I was called back to the base. Get in your car and go to the base. And I said, I don't want to go back to that place ever. I don't want to go back. But I was like, nope, you got to go. You got to go out the door, out the door.
I'm
Something.
amazed that they even gave you the option to drive back.
Oh, yeah, because I had my car with me.
Right. Which is,
So,
again, rare for Sea Org members. Most did not have cars of their own.
yeah, and particularly not at, an outpost like that,
Right.
because we were under punishment, essentially.
Right.
But I wanted to get back to Kathy,
Right. Understandably.
Yeah. So I got in my car, went back to the base, and got hustled into the gold conference room, in building 36, which was gold. And I was sitting in there by myself for about an hour, because of course Miscavige always has to make an entrance,
Right.
and he always has to make people wait, because that's the power move.
Right.
People are waiting on you. Anyway, he comes in, no entourage.
Hmm.
It's just him.
Okay.
And he says, I guess you heard Dan Kuhn blew. And I
Hmm.
said, no, I hadn't heard that. And he said, yeah, he blew a month ago. And he said, I'm willing to consider that maybe I offloaded the wrong guy. Well, the fact is, he needed some writing done.
Right.
And Dan Kuhn was doing that. And then Dan Kuhn blew.
Right.
He and Mariette blew, and they were gone. So where is he going to get a writer from?
Right.
Get Hawkins back. So he set me up writing all of the introductions to the basics. Each one of the basics has a tape set, and the tape set has a booklet inside, and the booklet has an introduction to the series, and any of Hubbard's writings from that period.
Okay.
It was a big deal. And he had nobody to write those introductions, so I was set to write those introductions.
Okay. And
And
again, what year was this now?
this now must be I don't know, 2003 maybe.
Okay.
So and so I was writing some of those. Then inevitably I was in trouble again. I was put on deck work. And me and Foster Tompkins were put on. We were doing stone veneer work at the birthing buildings.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, a security guard comes up and he says, "Okay, you guys are going to the RPF in LA."
Wow. The Rehabilitation Project Force.
Yeah.
Scientology's reprogramming camp.
Yeah. It's their re-education camp.
Right.
And Foster and I were like, "Okay, whatever. We don't care."
Yeah. And were you still married to Kathy at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because side comment, as I recall it, when you were offloaded to Los Angeles, the way that Kathy found out was because it was announced at a muster that you'd been offloaded. Is that right?
That could be right.
Okay,
I
that's what
never
I
talked to
remember.
her about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
that
mean,
could be
what
right.
kind of, you've been married, how long had you been married at that point?
Couple of years maybe.
Yeah. So you're just standing at a muster, meaning the
Yeah.
multiple times a day meeting, accounting for everybody, and you
Yep.
hear, oh, your husband's just
Your
been,
husband's been offloaded to the RPF.
yeah.
Um, so Foster and I went down to LA, routed onto the RPF, and I think we hold the record for the shortest RPF stint because 24 hours later, we were called up to the RPF in charge's office, and we were told, "You're not on the RPF. You're being reassigned to uh, the pack-based crew, which is
Okay.
the organization at the Los Angeles base, the big blue building. They are the people that do all of the uh, work maintaining the base. They
Right.
cook the food, they have the kitchen, they clean up after meals, they take care of all the construction, and they have a big wood shop where all the furniture for the ideal orgs is made. They make all the furniture in house.
Yeah.
And so we were told, well, no, you're going to pack base crew. So we went into the wood shop, and Foster, um, because of his computer background, he was assigned to a what's called a CNC router, um, which is, I think, computer numerical controlled router,
Yes.
and that meant that it was controlled by a computer, how the wood was routed. So you could program it to do to cut the wood or carve the wood according to a computerized pattern. You know,
Yes.
and so he was the only person who even understood it. So he was assigned to that, and I think is still doing that. You
Wow.
know, still there,
And
Foster.
again, just comment. Both you and Foster had been in the Sea organization by this at this point for easily 30 years.
Yeah, pretty
And you were
much.
both top executives, and now you're doing
Now,
maintenance and physical labor.
and physical labor in the wood shop, and I was assigned to the finishing area, which was doing all the lacquering and painting of the
Okay.
furniture. And Foster was running this computerized router. Um, and I don't understand why he's still there. I really don't. He should have left a long time ago.
Yeah.
But, you know, to each his own.
Right. No joke.
Yeah. So,
He also, I mean, his wife is still in, his kids were still in.
his kids are now gone.
Right. But they
Yeah.
were for a while.
But they were in. Yeah.
Yeah.
They were in. Yeah.
Yeah. People kind of get enmeshed, and it's not so easy to extract as one might think from the outside looking in.
Yeah. No, it is not easy.
Yeah.
So,
But so go ahead. So you're doing finish
so I'm
work.
doing finishing work, making signs, doing all kinds of things for the orgs, really. And one day, um, Dave walks into my office in PAC with Shelley and Larice,
Yes.
and he's like, "Jeff, what are you doing here?" And I was like,
Like as if he didn't know that's where
as
you
if
were
he didn't
working.
know. Yeah. And I was like, "Well, I work here. I'm in PAC-based crew, And he's like, "Oh, really?" Yeah. And I'm like, "Yeah, and you didn't know that?" Yeah, right, right. Of course. Anyway, a day later, get on the bus and get back to the base. Yeah.
Wow. So you
So,
also have the highest record of people kicked off and brought back to the base of anybody in the history of
yeah, I think it
Scientology.
was ended up being 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
And they started calling me Nine Lives
Yes.
because I was always coming back. We
Yes.
we come back.
The motto of the Sea organization.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's back at the base. Um, and I was married to Kathy for 5 years. And in that time, we never spent a Christmas together. We never had a day off together. Well, we had one day off together, which was there was one Christmas where uh, we were allowed a day to go shopping, to go Christmas shopping.
Okay.
Oh, big deal.
Right. For
And
what? For 2 hours? three
for
hours?
yeah, well, yeah, I think it was most of a day. We were
Okay.
allowed to go and do Christmas shopping because it would be a flap if you didn't send presents to your family,
Right.
So I think it was kind of from that point of view. So so Kathy and I went to the outlet mall out in Cabazon,
Yes.
and we had a day off together, which was the only day off we ever had
Wow.
together. And so we said, okay, this is our Christmas, because we knew we would never spend Christmas together. We hadn't ever spent Christmas together. So we just went around the mall and bought each other presents.
Wow.
And Kathy found a dress that she really liked. It was like $500.
Wow.
And I said, get it. You know, at that point, I had money because my mother had passed and she had left a pretty sizable estate to me and my brother.
Okay.
And so, by Sea Org standards, I was a rich man. I was able to buy a car,
Yep.
um, and treat Kathy to nice things.
Yep. And sorry, speaking of your brother, so what was his situation by this point?
He had when he left pubs in Copenhagen, he had gone back to LA, had rejoined the Sea Org, and had worked at AOLA for quite a few years. Um, he had gotten married twice,
Okay.
married and divorced twice, and then uh, and his second wife had a son, and then he and his second wife had two more children. So he had three children, two boys and a girl.
Okay.
Um, and then he divorced his second wife, and then married his current wife, Kathy, who was his college sweetheart,
Okay.
which is a wonderful story.
Yes.
Um, they kind of found each other late in life, and got back together.
That's awesome.
Which it was really really nice. So he had three kids, and his wife Kathy. And I would see them every once in a while. When I was living in LA, when I first started doing the campaign, I would quite often have lunch with him.
Okay. And was he still in Scientology at that point?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And yeah, my brother's third wife, Kathy, had been in Scientology, and she had been on the Apollo in Hubbard's household unit,
Okay.
which is a pretty high stress position, because if anything goes wrong with his meals or anything like that, then the household staff are in for it.
Right.
So she left the Apollo. I think she got in some kind of trouble. Left the Apollo, went back to LA, and left Scientology entirely. And then when she got back with my brother, she rejoined Scientology because he was still in Scientology at that time. He had left the Sea Org
Right.
and routed out, but he was still a Scientologist, and he had three kids at that time, and still does.
Understood.
So
So you had still been seeing them here and there.
yeah, when I was in LA, I would occasionally have lunch with my brother, and would occasionally drive up to Santa Barbara to see my mother before she passed in 1999.
Understood. And so what happened next? So you described that your offloads multiple times, your 9 lives, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what was the final
Well,
event?
the final thing was I was going to be offloaded from the Sea Org. And so I was put on the, leaving the Sea Org routing form, whatever that is.
Right.
So I didn't just jump the fence. I went on the routing form and was routing out of the Sea Org.
Okay.
And
But not because you'd asked to. You were put onto this?
I was put onto this. Yeah,
Okay.
I was being just kicked out of the Sea Org, um, which had been tried a couple times before. But there was one time I had a fitness board, and they were going to kick me out of the Sea Org. But I presented my entire history in the Sea Org to them.
Yes.
The Dianetics campaign, accommodations from Hubbard, and the statistics and all that. And so there was no way they could offload me.
And for people listening, a fitness board in the Sea organization is where you have a panel of, I think, 3 or 4 Sea Org members, and they review your ethics history, your PC folders, your counseling, your training, your production, your statistics, everything to determine whether or not you're fit, quote unquote, to remain in the Sea organization or not.
Yeah, yeah. And they could not offload me because I had too strong a record, of course. So then the final time in um, late 2004, I'm thinking,
Mhm.
I was just sent out to OGH and I was being offloaded from the Sea Org because I was such a horrible person. You know?
Allegedly. And OGH is Old Gilman House, right? It's the far end of that Gilman Hot Springs property where they would, uh, put persona non grata type,
Yeah, yeah. That's where all the horrible people were sent.
quote, unquote, yes.
Um, and you had to go through hours and hours and days and months of sec checking.
Right, interrogation for your
Yeah,
alleged, quote, unquote, "transgressions" and, quote, unquote, "crimes."
yeah, yeah. And the main thing I was being asked in my sec checks was, do I have any evil thoughts about David Miscavige? You know,
Mhm.
do I have any critical thoughts about David Miscavige? And of course, I had plenty.
Yeah, of course.
Um,
Why wouldn't you for someone who had repeatedly physically attacked you?
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Surprise, surprise.
But as most Scientologists do, I had learned how to float my needle.
Mhm,
And so I would just say, "Oh no, I think he's a wonderful, wonderful man." Needles
mhm.
floating. Okay, thank you. I was finally able to get through that part of it, and uh, then all of my belongings were taken from. Well, I had to go and pick up all my belongings from my berthing
Okay.
and take them out to OGH, and then took all my belongings in a U-Haul truck out to Beaumont, across the mountains to the
Right.
north of the base, and put them in a commercial storage facility.
Huh.
And and I was out there with a security guard, and he got a call that I was not to come back to the base, that my car would be delivered to me out there in Beaumont.
Okay.
And so we waited, and the car came, and then we drove down to the Hollywood Guarantee Building.
Okay.
And
On
wh-
Ivar Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles.
yeah, yeah,
Yep.
where I sat around a big conference table with OSA staff members and some lawyers.
Not
And
your lawyers, their
no,
lawyers, right?
no,
Yep.
yeah, yeah, they're lawyers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had a,
Were you given the, option to have a lawyer present?
no, of course not.
Right, of
Yeah.
course not.
And I
No.
wouldn't have known who to call anyway.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, go
But
ahead.
yeah. So, and there was a security guard standing behind me just out of camera range, you know,
Yep.
because that would look like duress. if I had a security guy standing behind me,
Right.
and I had to sign and sign and sign and sign all of this stuff about how I would never reveal what went on at the base, and I would never do this and never do that, on and on and on. And I just said, yeah, whatever, just get me out of here. You
Right.
know? And
Understandably.
yeah, yeah. And then, I was out on the street.
Wow, like you just walked out of the HGB and that was it?
That was it. I was gone.
Wow.
I was at the corner of Hollywood and Vine in Hollywood, sitting in my car and thinking about, well, what do I do next? Where do I go?
Yeah, what did that moment feel like to you?
It was just like, you know, it was just amazing. I mean, on one hand, it was kind of exhilarating
Right.
to be gone from the base.
Yep, I had the exact same exhilaration when I escaped.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
granted, our exits were different, but it's funny, I've thought about that in retrospect. Like most people, when they are making a major life change, they might have some regrets, things that they're looking forward to, pros and cons kind of thing.
Yeah,
Exhilaration was the overwhelming emotion in my experience too. It's
yeah.
interesting that you say that.
It was for me too. I just felt free. At that
Yes.
moment, I said, I can go anywhere now. I can go anywhere and, start a new life,
Yes.
you know, and
Yes.
it was an amazing feeling. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for sharing your story, and go ahead and show me your book again for I'll link to that as well,
Yeah.
for more details and the full story of what you and I have discussed today. We'll have our readers get a copy of your book.
Yeah. It's on Amazon, so you can get it.
Awesome.
You can get it there. And yeah, order a
Awesome.
copy. The whole
Okay.
story is in here with
Awesome.
a lot more detail.
Yes. Well, thank you again for your time, Jeff. I really appreciate you being here to share your story.
I am glad to be on your podcast.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Any last thoughts you'd like to share before we end here?
No, I think that kind of covers it. That's the whole story of how I restarted my life. But that's covered in the book. You know,
Yes. Awesome. All
yeah,
right. Well, thank you again, and until next time.
great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.